Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Doc Vlog. Now, I apologize in advance. This one isn't going to sound that great because I'm just using my phone again, and it's not going to look that great either because we're going to be doing a lot of looking at spreadsheets. Very exciting. But the spreadsheets are important because they're talking about how I'm planning for this film. And one of the first things that I started to do in the sort of pre-production planning for the film was go through this documentary right here that you can see on the screen, the Barkley Marathons with a Fine-Tooth Comb. Now, if you haven't seen this film, I strongly recommend it. It's a really, really great documentary about a crazy ultramarathon. I don't want to say too much about it just because if you haven't seen it, it's really fascinating. Great to watch. But it also has a lot of parallels with what we're trying to do in that this is a long sort of endurance contest that it takes place over a long period of time, takes place over a lot of miles, where you can't really just kind of show the drama of the thing happening because that would be a 60-minute or a 60-hour movie of just people walking through the woods. It would be super boring. So I wanted to look real carefully at what exactly they did, how they broke this documentary down. So I made this. This is a spreadsheet of scene by scene and how long each scene is, what actually is in this film. And there's a lot in here, obviously, but one of the main, I'll talk about a couple of the main takeaways that I got. So one of them, as you can see, is I've tried to color code the content based on how I would characterize it, with yellow being character development, red being sort of background or historical information about the race, and then green being the narrative of the race itself, like what's actually happening in the year that they went and they filmed the Barkley Marathon, what's happening that year, what's that sort of narrative of like who's racing, who's going to win. So one of the first things, and you can just see this just from scrolling through, just seeing the visuals of it, and this is why it's valuable to do something like this, is that we really don't get a lot of the race narrative until it starts to kick in kind of like around here, that we start to see a lot more green. So that's 18 minutes. Then we get a little bit more of it. There's like a 5-minute thing here that's sort of the race starting. Then we get more character. It really doesn't really start to kick in until almost 30 minutes into the movie that we start to really dive into the race narrative. So that's a lot of character development, a lot of story of the history of the race that we're getting before we really see much of the actual action of that year. Now, some of that may be specific to the Barkley Marathons in particular because it's a very strange race that has a lot of weird traditions, and its creator is a very interesting character. Again, if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend watching it. It's fascinating, really good. But still, I think that there's some value for us to be gained from seeing that, and I think it helped to drive home the point for me that it's really important to establish who your characters are and kind of the context of what they're doing. Otherwise, what they're doing isn't going to have a lot of meaning for the audience because they don't know who these people are. They don't really know what's going on when they're seeing, if they're watching us climb a mountain, but they don't know where it is. They don't have any context. They don't have any information about what the mountain is like and all this kind of stuff. It's really not going to mean anything for them. So you've got to have that establishing background stuff, and really quite a bit of it. Now, obviously, we're not going to have 30 minutes of it because our whole film probably is going to be about 30 minutes long, but still. Another big takeaway that I got from this is I have often felt like there just always needs to be some music in the background. Maybe it's a little bit of a crutch that I have in terms of video editing. I'm not sure. It's not really something that I had even thought about too much until I saw this, and when I went through and did this, and I realized that there's really very little music being used in this movie most of the time. There is some music. Whenever they've got animations on the screen, there's a little music going on. And every now and then, they will have some music, especially for sort of montage shots where there's no talking. But a lot of the film is just kind of live sound or interview voiceover and not any music going on, which is interesting. It's not how I would have approached it. So it's something that I definitely am going to spend a little bit more time thinking about and maybe doing some experiments with over the next few months to sort of see, to try to learn a little bit more about why it is that they did that and how we could apply not having music, how we can use not having music to sort of make the film actually more effective and more impactful. And of course, there's also the advantage of knowing places where you cannot have music, then you can save money on licensing music if you're doing that. And licensing music is crazy expensive, so always good to have a way to get some music out of there. So that's another important lesson that I took out of this that I think has been interesting. I also was impressed by some of the transitions from scene to scene that they use. So that's another thing that I've been thinking about, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's go into the next document, which is this. And I'm going to just scroll past all that because that's other planning stuff that I'm doing. But what I want to talk about right now is this part of this document, which is basically a minute-by-minute rundown of what I think our film could look like, assuming that it's about a 30-minute film. Now, obviously, I don't know what's going to happen, so this isn't like some kind of psychic prediction that I know exactly what's going to happen on the mountain, but assuming everything goes fairly according to plan, which it probably won't, but assuming that it does, this is one outline for how our film could look. And I've gone through really just wanting to map out minute by minute what's on the screen, what are we hearing about, to make sure that we have the character development that we need. And a lot of this early stuff is mostly character development and development of the mountain and the context of what we're trying to do, having that stuff early on so that when we get into the later part of the film, which is more about what's happening on the mountain during our attempt, the audience has that context for who we are and what we're doing. Now, again, obviously, I don't know what's going to happen on the mountain, so this could all be out the window. But as I said in, I think, the first episode of the show where I was talking about lessons from my previous work, it's really important, I think, to go into this with a plan for what we're going to try to shoot. And obviously, if cool things happen or if terrible things happen, we get other footage, then that's the part of a documentary is really put together in the editing phase a bit, but we still want to go in with a plan. So this is basically the plan that I have for the moment. Still a work in progress, but I have moved on to the next part of the work, which is this. Now what this is basically taking each scene from this, so like this right here, is then copied over into here, and we've got what the scene is, and then what I'm trying to do is go through and come up with a list of all of the shots that we would need to do that scene. Not counting interview footage, obviously we'll have interview footage, but other shots that, aside from the shots of the interview, what are the other shots that we might need to do that scene and to depict what people are talking about in that scene in a visual, interesting way. And I'm trying to err on the side of having too many rather than too few. Now, this looks really ugly because it is a Google document, and if you can do a nice, clean, bulleted list in a Google spreadsheet, I don't know how to do that. Maybe you can, but I don't know how. So right now it's just very ugly bullets with asterisks not spaced evenly. So here's one, here's the next one. Not easy to read. But what I'm going to do is once I've gone through the whole film, and I'm trying to do this, sorry, that's the dog in the background. I'm trying to do this sort of one scene per day so that I really can spend some time thinking about what are the shots that we could do, what are some creative things that we could do, really put my focus into just one scene at a time. So I'm not phoning it in a little bit. That's another one of the lessons that I learned that I talked about in the first episode of Doc Vlog. So that might be worth going back and watching if you haven't and you're interested. But, so I've got these shots, and then the plan is once I get all the way through the whole film, then I will pull these out and put them into like a Word document and then format them as a real bulleted list, not this ugly nonsense, and then sort them by where those shots need to happen and when those shots need to happen. So for example, like what shots do we need on the mountain in the fall? What shots do we need of us training outside in the fall? What shots do we need of us training in the gym? What shots do we need of us on the mountain in the winter? So then every time that I'm taking the camera when we're going to do something, I can bring with me a list of all the shots that we need sort of for that time and place, and we can do our absolute best to get those then so that, and it's just a way to sort of go into every single thing that we're doing with a plan for what we're going to shoot. Now, will I probably shoot more than what's planned? Yes. Is it possible that I will miss some things that I plan to shoot or some of these shots? Also possible. With the documentary, you've got to, stay on your toes a little bit. But it's really important to go in with a plan. And so that's the plan that I'm doing. And the other thing that I'm doing with this spreadsheet is trying to come up with a plan on how to transition from scene to scene in a creative, visually interesting way that's not just cut here, next scene, or fade to black, next scene. Now, that's not to say that we're going to do something cool and creative for every single scene transition. Sometimes just cutting is what you should do. Sometimes just fading to black is the most effective way to be conveying, for example, that time has passed or whatever. So there are a lot of these transitions that I'm coming up with that we probably won't use, but I'm trying to give some thought to what we could do if we wanted to have a sort of smooth, seamless, clever transition from one scene to the next. So one example is here, this scene, we've got Rick talking about his history in the mountains, and the next scene is going to be Barrett voiceover talking about Rick. So fairly similar, they're both about Rick. So one of the transition sort of ideas that I came up with is we get a shot, because we're going to, for this scene, one of the shots is going to be a shot of Rick training. He's got like this heavy weight sled kind of thing that he pulls. And so we'll get a shot of him pulling that towards the camera. And then as he's going past the camera, so when he's sort of blocking it and it's dark, or at least there's a dark blur in front of it because he's moving right in front of the camera, we can cut there. And then to begin the next scene, we will have a shot of him hiking past the camera. We can cut right when he's in front of the camera there, put those two together, and you'll end up with a kind of shot where he's moving, in the training shot in front of his house, he's moving towards the camera, he blocks the camera, then he's moving away from the camera, but now he's hiking and he's in the woods. Nice, smooth transition from one scene to the next. And then I've got this alternative idea, which is a sort of I'm sure you've seen this transition before, where you pan up to the sky at the end of some footage, and then it pans back down from the sky, and it's a different shot, different place, different time. So that's another idea for this scene. Now, are we necessarily going to use that? No. But it's nice to have that there, and I'm going to try to be shooting those as well so that we have those options. And then if we decide it's better to just do a cut here and that's it, fine, that's okay. But it's good to go in and have options. So this is hopefully a decent overview of the basic way that I am planning for this film in pre-production in terms of what's the story going to look like and what's going to actually appear on screen. Now, one of the next things that I need to do is get more in contact with some folks that we can interview for the film and try to figure out what it is that they would have to say, what they have to add, because of course that will change a little bit of the story as well. But this is one of the things that I'm working on, and I think if you're interested in making a documentary, I think doing something like this is a great idea, just to sort of have it planned out. Some people like to do storyboards. This is basically my version of a storyboard, and I can kind of see this visually in my head. I'm not a great artist. In fact, I'm a terrible artist. And I started doing a storyboard, but I just sort of felt like for right now, that wasn't going to be as helpful to me as this format where I've got scenes and I've got a list of the shots that I need. So a storyboard may work better for you, especially depending on your kind of film. But for me, I think this is what's working, or at least what feels like it's working well for me right now. So this is what I'm doing. And I'm trying to go through and just do one scene every night, come up with all the shots that we might need for that scene, and limit it to one scene a night so that I'm not getting burned out. But yeah, so this is what I'm doing, just cruising through this. So that is the end of this very boring episode about spreadsheets, and I will see you in the next one.